everyone, and welcome to Thorough Newspaper Analysis, which is brought to you by LawSeco. So, today we have a lot of articles, and all of them are very different in their nature. They're very interesting, I must say. So, the first article that we'll be discussing actually talks about the very recent advertisement which was brought in by Tanishq, which is actually a jewelry brand by Tata. So it actually has gotten some allegations from some parts of the community in India, and what are the backing to it, and what actually should have been done in this regard will be discussed in this article. Second, dormant but waiting to strike. This is from the Hindu, and this article also talks about the various terrorist organizations that currently, in the times of this COVID pandemic, are a bit subtle and are not very active. But still, the author says that it doesn't mean that they have vanished, and we should be prepared for their attack anytime later. Third, the good neighbor. This is from the Indian Express, and as we know that the International Monetary Fund has recently predicted that within the coming future, Bangladesh, in its per capita GDP, would overtake India. And this actually is something from which we, being Indians and talking about Indian economy, should take a message from and learn from this experience. And fourthly, Assam, Mizoram, and other boundary issues in the northeast. So this is from the Indian Express again, and it talks about the very recent conflict that has taken place on the Assam and Mizoram border, and also various other dominant conflicts, specifically if we talk about the border issues which are prevalent in the northeastern states. And fifthly, we have the news in flash, wherein we'll be discussing the small and crisp news points. With this, let's have a look at the LawSeco courses that we have for you. So if you're also listening to this news analysis and preparing for the Judicial Services exam, you can definitely enroll yourself for the Lord of the Courses, which is a judiciary test prep course. The link is available in the description box, and you can also download free study material from there. We're also excelling into various other courses like for SEBI, CLAT, All India Bar Exam, etc. With this, let's see that what is the multiple choice question for the day. HIV is a retrovirus that infects and colonizes cells in the first, immune system, second, immune system and the central nervous system, third, endocrine system, or fourth, immune system and endocrine system. If you know the answer, you can jot it down in the comment section below. So this is the descriptive question for the day. Discuss the constitutional rights issues involved in interfaith marriages and the opinion of the courts on the same. With this, let's start with the first article, which talks about the interreligious marriages. I'm very sure that you might have seen this advertisement. It's also available on YouTube, so you can have a look at too. But it has actually officially been banned by Tanishq. But still, obviously, it is floating on a lot of social media sites. So recently, this advertisement showing an affluent Muslim family. So this is the woman who is the mother-in-law over here, and she's organizing a baby shower for her Hindu daughter-in-law. But actually, this advertisement was brought in by Tanishq to introduce some new brand or their new series of jewelry. But then again, and with this, they wanted to show the collaboration or the unity that exists in Hindus and Muslims. But yet again, unfortunately, this has again been followed with several complaints about hurt Hindu sentiments, threats of violence, and also abrupt withdrawal of the advertisement. And also, Tanishq has rendered an apology for upcoming with this advertisement, though obviously they're not. They're also surprised to this reaction, but still they have rendered an apology for safety of their staff. Now let's understand that what are the reasons over here that such intolerance, and that too in such it was just a commercial, and still such intolerance was witnessed. So what are the real reasons behind it? Firstly, intolerance towards Hindu-Muslim marriage. Now, this is something that sadly we are a part of, and many times when we look around, we see that mostly people do not entertain specifically Hindu-Muslim marriages. Though interfaith and interreligion marriages are taking place, and obviously Hindu-Muslim marriages are also taking place, but still it is this Hindu-Muslim marriage that is the most controversial in its nature, keeping in mind the two different sets of faith that actually exist in these two religions, which definitely should not be celebrated. And this is really when we talk about secularism and equality in the society, and we have freedom of choice as well. So this should not be the case, but it actually is occurring in various parts of our society. Secondly, belief that interreligious marriages go against the incontestable social norms. Now, obviously, the orthodox segments of our society, and many times, if we would like to, there are various outfits, be it on the side of Muslims or on the sides of Hindu, like we have the RSS. Then on the side of Muslims, we have various, these who just put out some fatwas or some stuff like that, which absolutely holds no logic. But still, these are, they make sure that people are complying to so-called their social norms, which if they even don't want to, but still they're pressurized to follow them, and actually to practice politically triggered harassment of interreligious couples. And many a times you must have seen, and even know now in the state of Haryana, we have the safe houses, though they specifically render more service to those couples, those actually marriage within the marriage marry within their religion, but they're like intergoth or the goth same goth marriages, because obviously in Haryana they're treated as just like sin. But still, there have been instances where even Hindu and Muslim couples have been kept safe and protected in those safe houses in Haryana, because there is a tendency that many a times interreligious couples who marry each other are harassed by their family members, and also the cases of honor killing are something that we all know about. Then next, conservative attitude towards love marriage, because still there are people who think that marriages are a failure, or something arranged marriages are the best setup of marriage, but so on and so forth. But still it is their conservatism, but still they want others also to comply to it. And finally, the most debated object over here is love jihad, which is alleged that actually what Muslims try to do is that they bring in Hindu girls, or they marry Hindu girls, just so that they can change the demography of the nation, and then they can increase their own population. And that literally sounds very senseless, truly, if I were to give my opinion over here. But still, love jihad is something that these marriages are mostly blamed for. Then we have the reality check. Large towns and cities generate conditions for partial collapse of old community dominated order. Like if you can see in the metropolitan or in the large cities, huge cities, these norms are still not so strong, and people are giving freedom to their children or their family members to choose a partner of their own wish. Now, be it from the same religion, same faith, different faith, it doesn't really matter to them. Then public transport, workplace, restaurants, education institutions, they all facilitate and encourage intercaste and interreligious intermingling. So obviously, like if you go to some restaurant, now you have like fundamental rights are equal for every citizen of the country. So be are you're at your workplace or at any education institution, public transport or anywhere, all kinds of people, now be it from any religion, any sect, any community, any faith, or be even atheist, they're all welcome and are given equal access to these places. So that is why we should understand that when we are seeing cooperation on other ends, then why not let the cooperation happen in the side of marriages as well. The next, love marriages have long ancestry. So Dharma Shastra, so it's nothing like many times you might see people quoting that this is all coming from the Western side. Now in India, this is a very poor tendency that whatever we do not understand, we simply put it on the Western countries, that we are just bringing it from the Western country. And this is something not the Indian culture has ever had. Like you can take a very simple example of homosexuality as well, wherein people simply blame the Western culture outrightly, that it is the Western culture that actually has brought homosexuality in India. And same is the case with love marriages as well. But that definitely is not the case. And if we talk about our Dharma Shastras as well, they acknowledge and also endorse, they also put it forward for Kshatriyas called as the Gandharva marriage. So even in history, you must have read that there were 8 kinds of marriages. Typically, 4 were those that were actually allowed, and 4 were those that were considered to be invalid, like if it were done by intoxication or abduction, etc. But Gandharva marriage used to be one that was very well accepted, and it was very much celebrated as well. And then not a general trait for all Indians, specifically not in metropolitan cities, as we just discussed. And social intolerance is exaggerated by the trolls. Now, you must have observed that most of our celebrities as well in the Bollywood, or even the sports and everything, they also tend to do a lot of interfaith and interreligious marriages, but hardly does anyone raise a question on them, because obviously they know that it is out of their reach. But when it comes to common people like you and I, people always have a say to give. Now, whether you're asking for it or not, they just have to say it. So this is something that is not really visible in the metropolitan cities, or where mostly the level of education is more. Now, obviously, education is not a cure for each and everything that you can see, but still, educated people and also educated youth tend to be more tolerant many a times. Then the wrath and hate is manufactured by predominantly male dominated discourse of new elites. Now, many a times it has been seen that it is just to prove male chauvinism or male dominism, or even you can the patriarchy that we are living in. And many a times this has simply got nothing to do with anything else but just the political objectives and nothing else, and to secure their vote bank, nothing else. So we being learned people and responsible citizens should take this call and should be very aware of such things, and should not fall prey to such nuisance that we actually see around, and we should be treating each and every religion very much equally. Now, this is a small, this was not actually given entirely in the article today, but still it is a small jurisprudence or the legal side if we talk about the interreligious marriages in India. So, if we talk about the constitutional provisions, Article 21 and Article 25. Now, 21 is right to life and personal liberty, and then we have Article 25, which gives freedom to practice any religion, and it also allows conversion. Now, obviously, it is not desirable that if you're marrying into some other religion, you should really convert yourself into that religion or something. You should have your own faith, and you have all the right to carry on your own faith. And that is why the constitution very much supports interreligious marriages as well. And also, we have a precedent like Supreme Court in the case of Muhammad Salim versus Shamsuddin in 2013 held that a child born out of marriage between Muslim man and Hindu woman is legitimate. So many times, we tend to think that what about the children? So it's a very much legitimate marriage, and the children born out of such interreligious marriages. Now, be it just here the cases for a Hindu woman and a Muslim man, but otherwise also, if you are an adult, you get into a relationship and you have a child like after marriage. So it is a very much legitimate child. And then we have this specific act called as the Special Marriage Act 1954. Now, as we know that Hindu Marriage Act specifically deals with Hindu marriages alone, Muslim law deals with Muslim marriages alone, and similarly we have some other acts that actually accommodate all of these other religions. But we have this Special Marriage Act that deals with such marriages that are interreligious or interfaith, and they make such marriages very much legitimate. So this was Justice Sanjay Kishan Kaul. He actually said that the right of privacy is a fundamental right. It is a right which protects the inner sphere of the individual from interference from both the state and the non-state actors, and allows the individuals to make autonomous life choices. And marriage is one of that inner sphere choice, and one should be only responsible in taking the decision for his own life and marriage. There should not be any kind of interference, neither from the state actors or not from the non-state actors as well. So this is a small scenario. You can go through it. Here are some statistics that are given. You can go through them as well. With this, let's discuss the second article for the day, which talks about terrorism during and after the pandemic. So during the pandemic, instances of terrorism by organizations such as Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and Jaish-e-Mohammed, like JEMLET, have decreased. Why have they decreased? Because they have lack of resources. Because obviously, see, it's not something like they sow, or they can reap their all these armories and guns and all their tanks and everything from the soil. Obviously, there are nations who completely and totally support them now, in terms of finance, in terms of the arms, in terms of information, be it any kind of thing. But now, obviously, the nations are themselves preoccupied dealing and handling and coping up with this pandemic of COVID-19. So that is why there has been a diversion of the attention of these nations, and so these terrorist groups or organizations are currently lacking resources. And secondary, temporary loss of support from those hostile non-Islamic countries and tolerant Muslims. Now, as just we discussed, that there are a lot of nations that are quite hostile towards Muslims or hostile towards Islam, and then they actually tend to favor the other sect. And then there are also countries that are very tolerant to Muslims, and they want to just propagate Islam in God knows what way, but still they tend to help or support such institutions like Taliban and Al Qaeda, etc. So obviously now they're already into a lot of loss, economic losses going on, and we know that the entire world is going through economic crunch. So in that scenario, obviously these organizations, terrorist groups, are not being paid a lot of attention. But then again, in this article, the author very nicely says that maybe this is a time that they have become dormant, just like a dormant volcano. So, but that doesn't mean that they will never ever erupt now. So, which means that they can anytime get active once they are given up with their resources and all the things that they need, information, data, and stuff. So, they can definitely plan a threat towards the security of the world, and also we specifically talk about India as well. So, why terrorism is still a threat, let's understand. Aggravation of poverty in developing nations offers a fertile ground for recruitment. Now, if you can relate, a few days back itself, we discussed that the Nobel Prize for Peace has been given to World Food Program this year. And World Food Program had done with this agenda that we will not allow these groups or any kind of miscreant or any kind of nuisance to follow in the name of hunger. Now, wherever we have hunger, there is evident poverty, because obviously if people had money, they could definitely afford whatever they wanted to, but they are poor, so they're hungry, and that is why in the exchange of money or in the exchange of food, they tend to do anything that the offerer asks for, and many a times it is to get involved into terrorist activities as well. And similar is the case, a similar analogy can be taken in this regard as well, that since many nations have been stricken with poverty very badly, so there is a chance that these nations offer a very fertile grounds for such terrorist activities to grow very fluently. Like Al Qaeda and Islamic states, like in West Asia and Africa, recruitment remains undiminished by problems related to pandemic. And US is now less adversary to Taliban, because we know that they have had the Doha Accord, which was signed this year in February, through which US is trying to withdraw its own military or army troops back from the Afghanistan, and it is actually trying to make peace with Taliban. Basically, Taliban, if you are confused with these things, these are all terrorist groups, and just on based on from where they come from. Like for example, Taliban is specifically functional in Afghanistan. Al Qaeda is specifically functional in Pakistan. Then IS is in Iraq, Iran, Syria, and those areas. Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed. So these are all factions, terrorist factions, and they just belong to different areas, and so are they named differently. So please don't be confused with that too. Now let's understand that what are the implications of this Doha Declaration. Now, what was the Doha Declaration? Wherein US has had a talk with Afghanistan, and specifically with Taliban, which is a very a huge terrorist organization in Afghanistan. So it has actually tried to bring both the parties at peace, so that the US can successfully withdraw its military troops from Afghanistan. So after the very famous incident of 9/11, so after that only, like it was 9-10 years ago, when USA had deployed its army bases and army troops in Afghanistan, but now it wants to withdraw. So this was the entire context of it. So the declaration seems to be exercise in deception, because both Taliban and Al Qaeda are friendly towards Pakistan, which is a problem for India. Because as we know that India has border sharing with Pakistan as well, and India has a border sharing with Afghanistan as well. Now, both these factions, be it Taliban or Al Qaeda, have very good relationships with Pakistan. And if in case someday in the future, India tends to have an aggravated or a turmoil relationship with Pakistan, there might be a possibility that Pakistan influences Taliban and Al Qaeda to infiltrate into India through maybe Pak occupied Kashmir, and then through the line of control, and get into Indian territory and do some nuisance or terrorism related activities. And thus it is no respite, or in a way it is no relief for India, as recently itself the National Investigation Agency has conducted raids wherein it has suspected that a complete Al Qaeda network is functioning in India, and it has arrested 9 activists belonging to Kerala and West Bengal who were in in dealings, or who were in connection with Al Qaeda as well as IS as well. So this is something that India needs to take up very seriously, because there might be, you all might have seen this movie Holiday, Akshay Kumar's movie, wherein they talk about the sleeper cells. So that is something almost the same thing, wherein there are people who stay amongst us, they belong to us, but then we do not really realize that they belong or they are in connection with such terrorist groups. And these are some of those people only that are being arrested, but still there might be a lot of people, and that is why it is very important for us to be very beware about this situation. And after pandemic, the terrorist groups may turn offensive against India. So they might set up training camps in Pakistan or even try to infiltrate towards India as well. So we should be very careful about all these things. Now, with this, let's discuss the next article for the day, which talks about the regional implications of Bangladesh's economic success. So we'll just discuss it in short because it was a very huge article, but the points that were important for us will be only discussing that. So the International Monetary Fund has predicted that in the very coming future soon, Bangladesh's per capita GDP will overtake India's. Now, what actually per capita GDP is, we have discussed at length in a previous session, so you can go through them as well. So, it is saying that it will overtake India's per capita GDP, and it has triggered outrage in India. Now, it's not like literal outrage and is an outrage, but yes, in the economic terms, definitely it is a state of being uncomfortable because Bangladesh is the biggest trading partner when we talk about Southeastern nations for India. So in that context, but whenever we talk about the GDP or the economic scenario, India used to be way above or way forward to Bangladesh. But now if we realize that within the coming years, Bangladesh will actually surpass or it will actually overtake India, is something that can deter our confidence, and we should really be thinking about it. But then let's see that what are the regional implications, or in a way, there are more actually the positive implications of for Bangladesh at least, but not for other countries maybe. So, alternation of the world's mental maps of the subcontinent. Now, it is said that whenever the outer nations like the Western nations or the Middle East or the European nations, whenever they looked at the Southeast Asian countries, so the only prominent nations that they always used to have a look at were India and Pakistan. So Bangladesh, it existed, though it actually, it has been quoted that it actually is the the country eighth largest population of the world. But still, Bangladesh was not something that fell into the eye of other nations. But now, having done such remarkable growth in the recent years, Bangladesh has the potential to change this order, at least in the South Asia, and mainly for India and Pakistan. Then the changing economic weights of Bangladesh and Pakistan and South Asia will take place as Bangladesh GDP will actually, as we know, it will be increasing, and that will definitely have an impact on the other nations as well. So these are a lot of facts. You don't really need to remember them. Just the trend you should be able to analyze as to what is the trend of growth or deceleration in this area. Then acceleration of regional integration in the eastern subcontinent. Now, obviously, whenever a nation is economically equipped or economically sound or strong, it has a better tendency of maintaining or being friends with other nations. Because how are we actually, how do nations become friends? It's actually based upon the necessities and their demands at that particular time. Many a times, lines of credits, loans, etc. are provided, subsidies or something like, the tariff or the free trade agreements are provided. So obviously, if now Bangladesh will also have a reserve with themselves, or they will have greater capacity in economic sense, so they will have better things to offer to other nations, and that is why it might be a chance that it would dispute there might be a dispute between India and Pakistan in the SAARC countries as well, because Bangladesh will have a greater say in this regard now. Then if we talk about the change in geopolitics for Indo-Pacific, it will have an increased attention from East Asia, as we know, China, Japan, South Korea, and Singapore, and even US. And it would boost India's plan to accelerate development in eastern and northeastern states. But here is one very good point for India, that as we know, that these are the northeastern states in India. Here is Bangladesh, this entire area for this one. So already we have had a lot of projects wherein for the development of the northeastern states, Bangladesh, and even ports, like we have a very famous port of Chittagong. Its name is Chittagong. So Chittagong port is being developed. It is there, and it is used very much for India to carry stuff from West Bengal to these northeastern states through this area. And also, if Bangladesh will have a good position, so it might be a possibility that if India holds good relations with Bangladesh, as it currently even does, so there will be a greater chance for the development of northeastern nations, which is a good, or a silver lining for India. With this, let's move towards the last article for the day, which talks about the boundary disputes, and specifically talks about the boundary disputes between Assam and neighboring states. And if we talk about in this article, it's more about Assam and Mizoram. So here you can see is Assam. This is Mizoram. So very recently, conflicts have taken place on this border area of Assam and Mizoram, and people have been, pelting stones at each other, burning each other's lands, fields, etc. So as we know, this has happened. Now let's understand what actually led to this dispute. The contested land was historically cultivated by Mizoram residents, but on paper it fell within the Singla Forest Reserve that was in the Karimganj jurisdiction. Now, as you can see, this is Karimganj. This area is Karimganj, which currently is a part of Assam. But if we talk about the historical thing, then this complete area was initially, or in the historical days, was cultivated by Mizoram. Earlier, all these areas, Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Mizoram, and Meghalaya, and Nagaland as well, they were all part of Assam, but later through various different acts, they became independent states. And that is why almost all of these states have a lot of border disputes, as they claim some area of land which Assam also is claiming over. And similar is the case in this Assam and Mizoram situation as well. So it said that in the 1875 notification, it differentiated the Lushai Hills. Basically, it was this area of Mizoram. It was entirely, this Assam, Mizoram, this entire area was earlier known to be as Lushai Hills. So it actually segregated this from Chachar or Kachar, whatever you would like to call it. So it actually had differentiated. But after 1933 notification, it was actually changed. And the people from Mizoram actually are claiming that we should be following 1875 notification only. Now let's see that what are the other boundary disputes that are existent in the northeastern states. So like we said, that Assam over here earlier had Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Meghalaya, and Mizoram all were parts of Assam itself, and later they were segregated. So even Assam and Nagaland have a border issue. Assam and Arunachal Pradesh have a border issue, and Assam and Meghalaya also have a border issue. And even, due to these, one of the reasons only we have the inner line permit, wherein if just like in India, in the northern or southern or western parts of India or central part also, if you have to move from one state to another, you don't really have to get a permit prepared. Now, unless it were the COVID-19 times, but earlier in the normal situations, you do not need to have a permit to move from one state to another. But if we talk about specific northeastern states, they have a proper provision of having the inner line permit, which means that you will have to have a permit even if you would want to move from one state to another state in this area. This actually is done to, there are various reasons, historical reasons as well, to preserve these areas, their culture and diversity. Then also to avoid any kind of infiltration that might take place, so on and so forth, and also these border disputes as well. So this is something that we should be aware about, and also the cause that is behind these disputes in northeastern India. With this, let's move towards the news in flash. So we have one article today for news in flash, which talks about India's fight against HIV. So 2019 HIV estimation by the National AIDS Control organization which is known as NACO or NACO. So it is done by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. It said that we have 66.1% reduction in new HIV infections among children, and also 65.3% reduction in AIDS-related deaths as well. So this is something really to be very happy about, and this actually incentivizes us to do more in this regard. And also, the number of pregnant women living with HIV has reduced from 31,000 in 2010 to 20,000 in 2019. Now, this, as we know, is HIV, human immunodeficiency syndrome, which actually is the HIV/AIDS, which is the acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. So there is no cure, but it is treatable with medicine. As in, you cannot be 100% cured with this thing, but still you can keep it under a check. So this actually attacks the cells that helps the body fight infection. So that is the immune system. And that is how this entire thing, the HIV virus looks like. So you should keep these things in mind. What is the full form of HIV and what part or which area of the body it does attack. So with this, we are done for the day. We hope it was a good session for you. Thank you so much.